The carrier came in at dusk like a boxer who had survived the bell. Listing 1 degree, bow dented, a rectangle of flight deck peeled back like a thumbnail. A tug nosed her into the lagoon. In the water there was the color of forged steel, flickering with the light of welding arcs leaping on other ships. On the horizon, cranes stood against the sky like tuning forks. Lieutenant Commander Mason Hart of the repair ship Arcadia felt the deck hum under his boots as his engine shop spooled up another generator. He'd spent the last year learning to smell metal. Burnt copper meant a generator died. Hot oak meant the deck gang had started scarfing a new section of planking. A tang of ozone meant the radar boys were alive and quarreling. A messenger in a salt-stiff shirt jogged up, breathless. "Captain wants the plan in 30 minutes, sir. Carrier's asking if we can give her a heel patch tonight and landing wires by sunrise." "Tell him Sunrise is an optimistic poet," Mason said without smiling. "We've got machinists for pragmatism." He crossed the brow to a waiting barge where a mock-up of the carrier's wound had already been chalked on a sheet of plywood. Measurements scribbled, arrows at weird angles, a coffee cup ring bleeding into a dimension line. Around the board clustered the people who would decide whether the Pacific Fleet kept its schedule. A deck carpenter named May Two Hammers Collins, a welder chief with an Iowa drawl and a chess player's stare, a radio electrician who called every problem a conversation, and a bosun from the carrier who still smelled faintly of foam and paint. "She took it on the forward port corner," the bosun said, tapping the chalked rectangle. "Lens of the deck gone, arresting wire stanchions folded. We got fires out in 11 minutes. But the landing area is a hole you could serve soup in." "We'll cover the soup," May said. "Question is, do you want pretty or fast?" "Fast," the bosun said. "Pretty is for after the war." They didn't argue about materials. Pretty used to be teak from Burma, kiln-dried and seasoned. Fast was anything that behaved like a deck for long enough. Oiled fur, salvaged oak, even laminated plies glued with a resin that stank like a pharmacy. The Navy had learned an old truth. The sea didn't care what the label on the lumber said. Mason broke the tasks in the air with his finger. "We take the scar's edges back to good metal. May, you scarf and lay for broad shoes. Chief Warren, you bridge the main spar ring with a pair of angles. We'll steal off that store's barge. Mac, give me a portable capstan rigged for a resting gear tension test. I want that wire to sing again before dawn." The lagoon woke fully in the night. It wasn't silence you noticed out there, it was order. Diesel throats murmured. Cranes clicked. Air hoses hissed like snakes in love. From a medical ship, 2 moans lifted and broke apart in the wind, and nobody pretended not to hear. A destroyer, into the side dock for a new prop blade. A tanker, hose forests clustering like mangroves. The fleet swayed, but the floating city, service squadron, held, its streets drawn not in asphalt, but in braided hawser lines. Across 1,000 miles and one gulf of understanding, in a lightless room under a naval building, Lieutenant Naoki Sakuma sorted reconnaissance photos with ink-black fingernails. He had studied engineering before the war, had loved the exactness of it. A beam at a span, the moment diagram rising like a mountain in a textbook's column. The photographs were not exact, they argued. In one, smoke smeared the sky and a carrier sat cocked like a jaw. In the next, taken what the notes said was 40 hours later, the same carrier floated straight. On her deck, a rectangle gleamed brighter than the rest, a patch the color of a new coin. "Impossible," the captain beside him said, not loudly, which made it worse. Sakuma zoomed the loop over the far right of the second photo, little barges tied and mother and child knots along the dock face. He sketched what he saw: cranes with boxy counterweights, gantries on floating pontoons, a skeleton of a dry dock with numbers painted on cavernous sides. He wrote a word he had never used before: mobile. "We keep knocking at their doors," the captain muttered. "They bring the door factory to the neighborhood." Sakuma nodded, but his throat burned. He saw more than cranes. He saw practical doctrine, repair near battle, maintain momentum, deny the enemy the one resource he cannot replace, time. There were rumors of floating dry docks coded by letters and digits, of repair ships that held machine tools wider than cars, of radio workshops that could rewind transformers at sea. He had dismissed them as American bragging. Now there were lines of evidence on gloss paper. If we find the docks, we must strike them, the captain said. Sakuma looked at the pen tip resting on the lagoon. So many piers drawn in his mind that they made more coastline than the island itself. Yes, sir, he said, and swallowed the doubt. Striking a concept is harder than striking a ship. May Collins led the deck gang like a band leader. No baton, just timing. They chalked their scarf lines on the intact deck. Long parallelograms where old oak would taper into new layers. Her hands moved with a confidence you could almost hear. You don't just lay wood, she said to a young carpenter whose sleeves were still navy stiff. You tune it. Palms here. Feel that thrum? That's the heartbeat of the hull. You put the grain across it just so you calm the pulse. On the starboard side, Chief Warren's welding team crawled under the deck to the structural bay. They spoke in numbers and nicknames. I need those L angles at 36 and a clean edge on the web, he said. No popcorn, no pillantures. Copy, Chief. What's the fighting quality, Mason? 30 knots by breakfast if we do not get bombed, Mason replied. 24 if breakfast is late. The bosun watched the patch grow like a lid over a wound. The smell of resin climbed the ladders and met the ghost of aviation gas. Across the lagoon, an escort carrier siren made a stare of notes. 1, 2, 3, fire drill, then stopped. Practice, someone said, and nobody entirely believed it. At 0200, the arresting gear boys came in with tools bundled in their arms like infants. They moved in a practice crouch, as if someone were already yelling, "Clear the landing area." They had taught cables to behave since Coral Sea, and they spoke about them like old horses. This one's gentle. This one's got a habit of jumping the pulley when tired. The young petty officer in charge had a scripture reader's certainty. We'll give you number 3 and number 4 to start, he told Mason. Number 1's leads are scorched. I can pull it with 2 men if you keep the lighting steady and stop moving every damn barge like a child fidgeting in church. We move bars to cure sinners, Mason said. Pull your wire. The moon unpacked itself from a cloud. The patch flashed pale. May knelt and sighted along the grain like a sniper. Then she drove a row of screws with the ferocity of someone happy to be boring and useful at once. By 0430, the wire sang. Test weights banged, an arresting hook grabbed, cables yowled and let go. The bosun slumped against a stanchion and shut his eyes. I'm listening for the sound of morning, he said. It might sound like airplanes. He wasn't wrong. As the sky turned boiled rice gray, a tug's horn hooted once. Signal lamps blinked. Those quick little conversations that saved navies. A catapult crew ran hands along a rail like priests in a ritual. And on the repair ship Arcadia, Mason wrote 2 lines in the log. 0436, temporary deck patch complete. 0449, wires 3 and 4 test passed. 1 deferred, 2 partial. Under it, he added privately, men dead yesterday, pilots landing today. Arithmetic that keeps a war from calcifying. Sakuma's arithmetic came from another world. He ran the numbers on sortie rates, on damaged tonnage, on tidal windows. The equations refused to give him the answer he wanted. To drop an American carrier's operational availability below useful levels, you had to destroy more than an airplane deck. You had to break a schedule built over water by men with wrenches. He met with a small circle of officers and engineers. On a blackboard, he chalked a simple graph. Enemy repair cycle versus our strike interval. We assumed they must retreat to a fixed base for substantial repairs, he said. That assumption is now fatally wrong. Their base is where their tugs can pull a floating box and anchor it. A commander with a pilot's gaunt face frowned. You propose we strike their boxes? If we can find them, Sakuma said. They are not stationary. They can remoor, disperse, mimic barges. And they do not need all of them at once. They need enough to keep the calendar intact. Then we must break their calendar, the commander said with sudden joy, as if he'd caught a fish. Yes, Sakuma said, and didn't add, but they also have watches and spare calendars in crates. The first landing came at 0712. Nobody on the aft end of the patched deck breathed. A wildcat coaxed itself down the glide, hook out like a hungry beak. It kissed the new wood, the hook bit, the cable took, the whole ship flexed the way a tree flexes in first wind after winter. The plane thunked to a stop. Men ran, skittering on soles polished by deck soap and fear. Someone whooped. Someone else slapped the wire as if it were a horse that had jumped a fence clean. Mason didn't whoop. He listened. He could hear the creak of bolts settling, the murmur of the patch. He could hear, too, the barge crews on Arcadia turning back to the next job, to the destroyer with a wrung shaft, to the oiler with a pump clutch that kept yawning. Victory never emptied the inbox. He went to find May. She was sitting on a coil of manila, eyes red, sipping coffee from a cup black with fingerprints. Pretty enough? He asked. She'll never win a beauty pageant, May said, but she'll wear a crown, tire rubber, and salt. They watched the second landing. It was cleaner than the first. The boat-shaped mouths of the floating cranes grinned. Sakuma received the report of that landing from a man who had counted it by ear from 30 miles away. Engines throttled down in pairs, the pitch different from practice. It was a musician's message, not a military one. Yet it told him what the photo had. The Americans were back to operations so quickly that even the sound of their ships did not leave time for a sigh. He wrote a private memo he could not file. The battle is between wound and suture. We have weaponized the wound. They have weaponized the suture. By noon, the lagoon was a city in market day. Tugs pushing, whistles haggling, hoses like alleys. A small floating dry dock had swallowed a destroyer leader. Along its concrete walls, men moved like punctuation. There were people you never saw in the newsreels because they were busy being punctuation marks, commas, and semicolons that kept sentences from crashing into each other. Somewhere, a chaplain gave a service over a body bag. Somewhere else, a cook slid loaves out of ovens, the smell of yeast daring death to try and be important in the face of bread. Chief Warren flipped his visor up, a stripe of clean skin on his forehead like a map. Next, he said to Mason, ready to be bored. Elevator Bravo stuck half down on the Shenandoah. They can run planes past it if we pin the gate, but they'll be slower than a turtle carrying a piano. Let's make M faster. I've always wanted to argue with an elevator, Warren said. They're arrogant. They crossed to a utility barge where the elevator crew waited with faces drawn into fine lines of fatigue. The lead petty officer, a woman from Oklahoma with forearms like ropes, shook Mason's hand. It jammed with heat. Rails went egg-shaped. We got a jacking plan, but we need steel holy water. We brought gallons, Warren said, holding up his stinger. They jacked, shimmed, cursed, burned, cooled. The sweat ran down Mason's spine and pooled where no heroic book would mention. When the platform finally rose level, the elevator woman grinned the way you grin when a door you hate finally apologizes. Don't slam it, she told the deck crew. Treat it like a cranky aunt at Thanksgiving. That night, as Arcadia's engines throbbed slow and satisfied, a destroyer escorted 2 damaged ships into the circle. The destroyer's captain had a tired poet's eyes. He hailed over a loudhailer. We brought you chores, he said. Don't say we never bring gifts. Tie up, Mason called back. We accept tips and machinable stock. On the repair ship's fantail, May tuned a guitar with the same hands that tuned deck. The song wandered. Some men listened. Others slept where they sat. Across the water, signal lamps practiced youth and electricity. Out beyond the reef, a line of picket destroyers kept watch for what the pilots called angels that hate us. On one of those pickets, a kid wrote his mother that the moon on the water looked like someone trying to polish a shield with a cloth that kept wrinkling. Sakuma Reading intercepts, thought of shields. He drew a final sketch on the back of a menu. A ship's profile, arrows showing damage, boxes representing repair assets drifting close like remeras, a clock face with a number scribbled over by hands that had forgot to stop. He folded the sketch and put it in his breast pocket. If he lived, he would show it to someone who could build a better answer than strikes, someone who could build docks for his own navy. If he died, perhaps the pocket would carry the idea to the ocean, which likes ideas that float. At dawn, Mason watched planes leap from the deck that had been souped 12 hours ago. The first one shook the patch, and the patch shook right back, like two men who had agreed to be friends after a fight. Faster than they can hurt us, the bosun said, half prayer, half claim. For today, Mason answered. Tomorrow will have its own arithmetic. His eyes lifted to the horizon, where there would soon be a new set of jobs, a new wound to argue with, a new chance to make time bend. He wasn't a philosopher. He simply knew that every hour stolen back from damage was another hour pilots flew, convoys moved, and men wrote letters with ridiculous content. The cook learned to make donuts. The chaplain lost at poker. I saw a fish that looked like a cigar. Those letters were proof of strategy. The lagoon exhaled. Cranes began another slow ballet. Someone shouted for more coffee. Somebody else found a wrench that had fallen into a bilge, wiped it, kissed it for luck, and went back to work. And very far away, in that dark room, Sakuma opened the folded menu again and ran his thumb along the pencil lines. He could not help but admire the enemy's competence. It was an engineer's curse, to love elegant solutions even when they were aimed at your ruin. He wrote in his private notebook, "We try to win by subtracting. They win by adding." Then he shut the book and went to the briefing where the talk would be of ordnance and vectors. He would speak when asked. He would not say the one true thing he had learned. The battle for the Pacific had become a race between damage and repair had learned to sprint.